You guys want to watch something? No. He doesn't watch something.
Someone's watching the Grosjean crash.
No spoilers.
I was just about to say that. No spoilers, unfortunately for Grosjean, but yes, no spoilers.
Good evening, everyone.
Hello.
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 Hi everyone, we'll just wait 1 minute for the last people to join. We'll get started.
Test.
Yeah, all good.
Mic check 1, 2.
All good.
Thank you.
Mic check also.
Hello.
Yeah, it's
hello.
all fine.
Thank you.
Mic check.
All good.
Oh, you hear me, Anthony?
Yes, we can.
Mic check. Should we be muting our microphones?
So what I'll do is I'll actually just do a mute all. It just makes it easier to manage with some people having some feedback and just managing the echoes. But you can just unmute your mic at any time if you want to ask a question. But yeah, it just makes it a bit easier to manage. Okay, I think we'll get started, everyone. Thanks for coming to this week's seminar. The seminar today will be on iRacing settings, because it's very important to get all your settings dialed in before we start with all the training and everything, because it just makes it easier to concentrate on the techniques rather than worrying about do I have a correct FOV, is my force feedback giving me the correct information and everything. So just a quick introduction to myself. My name is Josh and I'm a senior instructor at Driver 61. I've been here since the start of the sim racing course, so since about January, I think. And I've been on iRacing for about the last 4 years. I think about 4.5 years, I'd say. And I hit 8,000 iRacing last year, which puts me, I think, in the top 50 in the world. So yeah, I've dialed in the settings pretty well in iRacing, and I think I can help you guys with setting up nicely. So Peter's also here to help. If you want to just give a quick introduction as well, Peter.
I think, hi everyone, my name is Peter Zuba. I'm also a senior instructor at Driver 61. I've joined the Sim Racing Academy a little bit later than Josh. I've recently hit 6,600 iRating on the road side of iRacing as well, competing in top tier leagues as well. And I also welcome all of you here for today's seminar session. I'll be helping out Josh in the text chat. If you have any questions, please feel free to pop them there.
Great. Okay. So yeah, let's get started. So on the agenda for today there'll be 3 sections. We'll start with force feedback because all the information you get from the car in any sim comes through the force feedback, and it really is your best friend unless you're lucky enough to have a motion simulator or any vibration. Just really is one of the most important things to dial in your force feedback. And then pedal setup and configuration. I know there's a lot of different types of pedal sets out there. We try to cover all our bases on helping you set up dead zones and brake pressure and everything. And then field of view and camera settings sort of ties in quite nicely with week 1 of the course, so vision week, because if you have the correct camera setting and the correct field of view, it just makes dialing in your vision all that easier. So yeah, we'll start with force feedback. If you have any questions, just feel free to pop it in the chat. At any point, and Peter will be free to answer it. So what are the objectives with setting up your force feedback? Ideally, you need to be able to feel all the curves. If you hit a big curb like here at the Nürburgring, it should jolt your steering wheel quite significantly. You shouldn't just have a stable steering wheel over it. So it needs to be strong enough to do that. You should be able to feel the track smoothness. If you're driving at a track like Sebring, your steering wheel should be oscillating and vibrating significantly more than if you're driving at a smooth track like Okayama, like you will have been for this last week. You need to be able to feel the car load. This is probably the most important thing. So you'll learn this a bit more in week 2 of the course. But as you start to introduce the steering lock coming into a corner, you should be able to feel the force feedback get a bit heavier as your tires reach the peak load. And then if you increase the steering lock a bit too much, the force feedback should ideally go a bit lighter as the tires lose grip and you start to understeer. And then also have no clipping in your force feedback. We'll talk about this a bit more in detail later, but it's just a very important setting which you make sure isn't happening. You need to be able to make judgment calls on the behavior of the car. This sort of ties in with the feeling the car load. But if you, like I said before, if your force feedback is going a bit lighter, you should be able to feel this and notice this and make a judgment call on what to do. So like if your force feedback goes a bit lighter, it could be because you're understeering and you need to hit the brakes a bit. And then it's incredibly important to know the difference between firmware settings with your wheel and then iRacing settings, and in what order to set your firmware settings and then to set your iRacing settings. So just a quick overview of all the force feedback settings within iRacing. So this seems very obvious, but I will tell you that I've had more people than you would think who haven't enabled their force feedback. And they're driving around, and to be honest, it shows. So yeah, just make sure that you've enabled your force feedback. I'm sure all of you have. And then use linear mode. So this is go into this in a bit more detail later, but this is a setting that's focused on direct drive wheels, and it just allows direct drive wheels to output the full range of force feedback and torque that they have. But without a direct drive wheel, it's probably best to leave this off. Reduce force feedback when parked. This is just a quality of life thing. So when you're stationary, the wheel isn't going to oscillate left and right, but it doesn't really affect you when you're driving at all. Maximum force. This adjusts to maximum force feedback. So say you have a direct drive wheel like a Simucube or a Fanatec direct drive, you'll be able to Google what your maximum direct drive wheel force is, and then just put this in here. But be careful, because say you have a Fanatec direct drive, if you hit a wall and you've got your wheel force all the way to the maximum, it could hurt your wrists or even break them. So just be careful with that. You might want to put it a bit lower. And then wheel force. this is also, I think the description's a bit wrong on this, but this is also essentially just your force feedback strength. So this is something you can adjust on a per car basis. And, you know, if you go to a Mazda, you might want to have a slightly higher force feedback than if you're in a Formula 3 car, because the Mazda's quite numb with the steering, and, you know, it's got road tires, so there's not as much feeling coming through it. Whereas with the F3, you know, you've got really stiff chassis and slick tires, so it's just going to give you a bit more detail. Damping, this gives a sense of friction, which is mostly notable on lower end, mostly gear-driven wheels. So this is like your Logitech G2029 type wheel, and some of the Thrustmasters, I think. It basically makes the wheel feel heavier when you turn it, or when you're going in a straight line, or like at low load situations. So generally, if you have a higher end wheel, I just leave this on 0. But if you have one of the lower spec wheels, it might be better just to put this on a bit. So your wheel is a bit heavier. Minimum force, this is the base level of force applied to the wheel. I generally leave this on 0, but for lower end wheels, you might want to put this on like 5% or 10%, just to make the wheel feel a bit heavier. So similar to the damping, but this is just the actual force feedback, minimum force feedback. Just for future reference, I have a Fanatec V2, so it's not the highest spec you can get, but, you know, it's got a decent amount of force on it. So an important note about force feedback is to know what clipping is and how to avoid it. So in iRacing, if you press F on your keyboard whilst you're driving, you'll be able to bring this box up. I assume F is for FPS, but it might be for this F bar, which is the one we would need to be looking at. This F bar essentially tells you how much force feedback iRacing is outputting. You see here, it's right in the green. If you go around a really fast corner, like the highest load corner possible, maybe Lime Rock Park Turn 1, there's a lot of force on your steering wheel, or like the last corner at Lime Rock Park or something. If this bar goes red, it means iRacing wants your wheel to output more force than it supports. So say a Logitech G29 is only allowed to output 4 Newton meters of force. If your bar is going red, it means that iRacing wants to output 5 Newton meters, but that's more than your wheel supports. So what you'll essentially feel is that you'll still have resistance on your wheel, but the actual force feedback, the detail, will just turn off. And this is something we obviously want to avoid. If it goes orange, that's okay. Ideally, the highest load possible you have will make the bar go orange, but never go red. So you can tune your maximum force feedback setting to avoid this, or there's an auto button, which we'll talk about later, which helps to avoid this, but it's not 100%. So the recommended process for setting up your force feedback. So firstly,
Excuse me. This is Anthony. Just real quick. So my force feedback area now has strength. Is that this, which is like a 10-to-1 thing? It's a different setup. It says strength, wheel force, dampening, and then mid force.
okay, yeah, so the strength is just your force feedback strength. So that should replace one of these bars, right?
Yeah, it took the max force away.
Okay, yeah, so your max, you should set the wheel force. If you have that, set the wheel force to what the strength of your wheel is, so you can just Google that.
Okay.
And the max force is just your force feedback strength, which you can change per car.
All right.
Okay, so yeah, the recommended process for setting up your force feedback. So firstly, you want to install the firmware. So this is where, say you got a Fanatec wheel, you go onto Google, you type Fanatec V2.5 drivers, download them all, and then install them. and then you can calibrate your wheel rotation and enable the force feedback within the firmware. You should do this first before going into iRacing. And once you've done that, you can run the iRacing calibration. So you just click, calibrate wheel and turn your wheel all the way right, all the way left, and do what it tells you to do. And then obviously enable the force feedback, reduce force when parked. And if you have a direct drive, enable linear mode. And then set your wheel force and maximum output and everything, and force feedback strength if you have that. So just quickly what linear mode does. If you have linear mode unticked, so you have it off, it will increase the low forces and decrease the high forces. So for lower end wheels and lower strength wheels, like the non-direct drive wheels, it will give you a more consistent force feedback feeling. But if you have the direct drive wheels, where there's like a massive range of force it can output, you want to turn this off so it can give you that full range. And it will feel a bit less consistent, but it'll feel a bit more detailed. I
Can I
have
ask
a,
you a question, Josh?
yep, go ahead.
You know the max force and the wheel force. I have a VRS wheel, so basically, would I set, which is 20 Newton meters, would I set the wheel force to the 20 Newton meters or the max force or both of them?
I think it depends on, so some people in iRacing have this setting, and then some people like Anthony have, instead of max force, they have force feedback strength. I have that.
I have the force feedback strength actually. But
Yeah,
I know
so
it
set the
uses-
force feedback strength as just something that's comfortable, so you can do that whilst you're driving.
Right.
We'll go into that later, and then set the wheel
Okay.
force to the maximum your VRS
Okay.
wheel can output.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah. So yeah, that just goes over linear mode, and why you should have it on if you have a direct drive wheel. So just continuous. If you have a higher end wheel, set the damping to 0. You can experiment with this, but I would highly recommend if you have a Fanatec wheel or a direct drive wheel or one of the high end Fussmasters to set it to 0. I also set the minimum force to 0, but if you have a gear driven wheel, it's recommended that you have it on about 5%. There's also this auto button. I don't tend to use the auto button. I like to just fine tune the settings myself. I find it a bit better just personally for me. But you can just basically, this will be inactive, like blanked out like it is here initially. So what you need to do is drive 5 laps on track, let iRacing just collect all the data on your wheel and everything. And then this button will activate and you can just click auto and it will set up all of this settings for you already. And this is good for avoiding clipping. So if you have an issue with the force feedback always clipping, it's recommended to use the auto button. So do we have any more questions about this before we go into the next section on pedals?
I got a question. What do you, I don't know if you mentioned earlier, like how do you find out if you have the direct drive or not?
You would know because they're like £1,000. But it's usually SimuCube, AccuForce, Fanatec, I believe, are the most well-known drive wheels. I don't have one. But what wheel do you have?
I got I got a Thrustmaster. Is the mid-level one, I guess, a T300 RS.
Yeah, that's not a direct drive one.
All right.
Yeah,
So just leave a linear mode on then.
I leave it off if you have a non-direct drive, leave it off.
Oh, off. Okay, cool.
So what settings do you tweak per car? Is there anything that you do tend to kind of change a lot?
I change the force feedback strength or the wheel, or if you have this settings, I change the wheel force per car. So for a Mazda, I have it a bit higher. For the LMP2, like I drive now, that's got no power steering or anything. So I put force feedback down a bit because otherwise my arms would probably fall off. Yeah, so that's the thing I change per car. Other than that, I don't change anything else because otherwise you'll have to it'll be a bit too big of a change, I think.
So if I've strength and wheel force, it's the wheel force I need to change, or the strength
Yes, the wheel force.
force, right?
Hey Josh, I have a quick question. If you're using the auto button, like if you're doing 5 laps and you pull up your relative box and you can see it says auto and you click on it, how accurate is that really? Because I find sometimes like it is just way too much.
I don't personally use the auto button, so I couldn't say. Maybe Peter or if anyone else uses it, they can put it in the chat.
Okay.
But I don't personally use it, so I wouldn't feel comfortable, telling it
Okay.
if it's good or not.
Thank you.
Well, on my end, I personally do use it, although I usually deviate from it like a click or two here and there. But I haven't had problems with it so far. But you gotta remember that every car and track combination might require a different setting.
So just to reiterate that, there's you shouldn't really keep your your strength, your wheel force strength at one setting for all cars. You should adjust it up and down according to each car. Is that correct?
I would say so, yes. Just because if I say use the same setting in the Mazda as I do in the LMP2, the Mazda will be very, very light on the steering.
Okay.
So I just turn it up so I have a consistent feel for each car, actually.
Okay.
But that's the best way of me describing it, actually.
Okay.
Otherwise, there'll be a massive difference in the strength for each car.
That might be a big difference for me. If I change it, I might drive better. All right. Thank you.
Cool.
I got a question. So the settings save, like, if you're setting it for each car, is gonna save for each car?
It should do.
Oh, okay, cool. Like it's not per like road cars or old cars. It's just like,
okay. Actually, there's a setting. Maybe you can see it. Yeah, here we go. This thing's a key. So you see, use custom controls for this car. So say I go into, I don't know, an oval car. I will want, I don't know, a low force or something. So I put the low force. I'll use custom controls for this car. Click the low force, and then it won't change all the settings for everything else.
all right. Yeah, it gets pretty heavy with the O.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I think we'll move on to pedals now. Just for
can I ask
of timing.
another question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So I'm not quite sure if when you set the settings and you uncheck the use custom controls for this car checkbox, is that become then your default setting or?
Oh, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I did. I just realized. So if you uncheck the use custom controls, is that the setting that you're gonna have across all the other cars?
I believe so, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
Yeah, it should be like that. Sorry to interrupt, Josh. So it should be like that in theory. You're just better off double checking it before you drive another car.
Yes. Okay. Is there a part of these options dialog box that you can save control settings, or they just stay this way across all the cars?
It should save by saying use custom controls for the car.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
So,
perfect.
On the settings, if you want to use auto just to see where it starts out, that's grayed out. And if I try and click that, it just unchecks enable force feedback without doing anything with auto.
Yeah, you gotta you need to drive 5 laps on the track or somewhere around there before it activates.
Okay.
Yeah, because it just gets all the data from the wheel, and I don't know what it does behind the scenes, but yeah, so it can choose this best settings, I guess. Okay, so let's move on to pedals. If anyone has any more questions, you just put it in the chat. and Peter can answer it. So what are the objectives? Your foot should be able to rest comfortably on the pedal without, ideally, once your foot is resting on the pedal, it shouldn't activate any input on the pedal. It's a very common issue, and we'll go into it more, where people will be coming into a braking zone with 5 or 10% throttle on, or they'll be driving down the straight with 10% brake on and just be losing time for no reason. So that's the pedal position is very important. And you should be able to brake consistently with your braking and also your throttle. And your pedal weight should be, if you have a load cell or an adjustable brake, for example, you should be able to make that comfortable so you can consistently hit, say, 80% or whatever max pressure you need to hit for the car. And then physical position, you need to make sure pedals are secure. Obviously, this is, depending on the space you have or the kind of setup you have. But just try your best to keep the pedals secure. Ideally, they shouldn't move at all, so you can consistently hit the pedals as consistently as possible. This is a good guide in terms of like your position for where you should set everything up. Like at 45 degrees, it says on your arms and bent legs, so that you're using a bit of your ankle motion for the pedals and also a bit of leg motion, but it shouldn't just be ankle, it shouldn't just be leg. But yeah, that's the best guide we found for the positioning. So core concepts to understand before we go into more detail. Load cell versus potentiometer. So these are just the two types of mostly brake pedal in particular. So a load cell pedal measures the pressure you put into the pedal in kilograms, whereas a potentiometer measures the distance that the pedal moves. So if you have a load cell brake pedal, you can essentially set it up so that it doesn't move. It only moves like an inch. But you might put in 40 kilos of pressure into it, and it will move an inch. Whereas for a potentiometer, it just the pedal input is based directly on how much it moves on the distance. So it is recommended you have a load cell pedal, a load cell brake pedal. But if you have a potentiometer, that's okay. But the load cell is just easier to get consistency with your braking, especially. And then also, it's very important to understand dead zone. So this is where the input starts and stops to register, and you have two dead zones: a low end dead zone and a high end dead zone. So, for example, if you're driving around and on the straights, you see that your brake is dragging like 10%, you might want to go into your settings and add a 10% brake dead zone to avoid this. And you can do the same for the throttle. And say when you're getting onto the throttle, it's only going to 95%. You might want to add a 5 or 6% dead zone on the high end on your throttle. And we'll go into more detail on how to set these up. So firstly, it's similar to the force feedback, but you want to download the firmware for your pedals. So this is the Heusenfeld Smart Controls, which is probably the best firmware out there, I would say. I have a Heusenfeld Sprints, and this firmware is really amazing in terms of dialing in your settings. So firstly, just download and install the firmware. So just go onto Google and type Fanatec V3 firmware, or drivers even, and then perform a manual calibration in the firmware before doing it in iRacing. So just calibrate, your pedal for full travel. So just press it all the way, release it all the way. It's pretty simple. And then for the brake, when you're setting up the brake, if you have a load cell, basically, I would recommend setting your brake so that if you press it very hard, but comfortably, it only goes to about 80%. Because in iRacing, you never really want to go above 80% pressure, because you'll either lock up above 80% or you will hit the ABS. In iRacing, you don't really want to hit the ABS in any car. You should still be able to hit 100%. If you spin and have all the adrenaline, you should be able to just hit 100%. But I set my pedal up personally, so if I can press it very hard, comfortably, it only goes to about 80%. And that means I can just hit that 80% consistently in hard braking zones, and it's not an issue. But this is a personal preference thing, but that's just what I would recommend. And you can play around with this. So you see, you have the max force in the Heusenfeld, you can just click up and down, and that will change it. And it's the same in Fanatec. So this is the dead zones. Against the Heusenfeld because it's the best firmware, but it's very similar for the Fanatec, I know. I'm not sure about the Logitech and Thrustmasters, but I'm sure it's quite similar. So if you want to set a low end dead zone, you see you have a set minimum. So you press the pedal to whatever dead zone you want. So 1 to 5%, or maybe 1 to 10%, doesn't really matter. You hold it at 5%, click set minimum, and that'll be your new minimum pressure. So if you press it to 4%, there should be no input at all. But if you go to 6%, it should be, it should go up a bit. And then it's the same for the maximum. So say you want to go, you press the pedal to your desired max input. So say you put it to like 90%, and then you'll just click set max, and that'll be your maximum pressure. I think I use like a 10% dead zone on the high end for the throttle, and then like a 5% on the brake for the low end. So within iRacing, this is one of the most important things for the brake pedal, especially when we get onto that with a force factor.
Excuse me, can I ask a quick question? On the V3s, so if you wanted to set it to 80%, you push the pedal down, and when the bar goes up about 80%, you set that to max?
Yeah, so I used to have
how it is?
Yeah, I used to have a V3s, and that's exactly what you do. Exactly what you say. Just press 80%, click set max. You don't get a kilogram value in the Fanatec.
Correct.
But you just get the bar.
Okay. Thank you.
So yeah, with an iRacing, just select pedals and do the exact same as you do with the firmware. Press it all the way, release it all the way for all the throttle, brake, and clutch. So then with a brake force factor, so this is this setting here. This is very important. If you have a low cell brake, it's strongly recommended to set this to 0. And what this will do is it will set the pedal to be completely linear. So if you look at this line, it's a bit bent at the bottom. If you can imagine it being just a straight line. So if you put 50% input into the pedal, the game will output 50%. And this is what you want for a low cell pedal because it's just easier to modulate. And it's completely linear. If you have a non-load cell pedal, so potentiometer pedal, like a Logitech G29 pedal or something, where it's only based on distance, it's quite hard to modulate the low forces. So say you want to like hold 5 or 10% going into the apex. So 5 or 10% brake input going into the apex. That can be quite difficult to do with a potentiometer pedal because there's not much resistance on it. So what you can do is you can set this brake force factor to between 1.6 and 2. So say you have it on 1.8, the pedal graph is going to look very similar to this S shape. And it means that for the lower inputs, say you put in 30% input, the game will only the game will only output 20%. And it just makes it easier to modulate below forces because you're moving your pedal more and it's not going to make the brake increase as much in iRacing. By default, this is on 1.8 in iRacing, so just be sure to put it back to 0 if you have a load cell because it's going to really help you. I actually had someone today who had it on 1.8 and we put it back to 0 and you gained a lot of time in my masterclass session. So it is possible to set your dead zones in iRacing if you don't do it in your firmware. It's recommended to do it in your firmware, but you can get around it by doing it in iRacing. So for the low end dead zone, it's essentially the same thing. You just press the pedal to, well, where it says here 2.9% or whatever dead zone at the low end you want, and then click done. That'll be your new minimum low end travel, and then press it all the way and click done. And then you can do this for all the pedals. And then for the high end, it's essentially the same. You see he's pressed it to 95.1%, and then you click done, and that'll be your new maximum force for the pedal. But it is recommended you do it within your firmware because it's just a bit more accurate than doing it within iRacing. So common issues with people's pedals.
Josh, can I ask you, please, to explain again the previous? I didn't understand that about setting the minimum in iRacing.
Yeah, so you'll click in iRacing, you'll click calibrate pedals. It'll say release the throttle fully. So what you'll do is instead of releasing it fully, you'll hold it at whatever minimum dead zone you want, press it all the way, release it to whatever minimum dead zone you want, and then click done. So you won't release it all the way. You just release it to the point of the dead zone.
Yeah, Josh, you press it up to maximum, don't you? Then on the way back down, if you want it at 5% your dead zone, you just let it come back down to 5% and hold it there and then click done, don't you?
Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah.
Josh?
Yep.
I have a Ricomotec pedals and I can define the dead zone and the maximum value for each pedal. I have a load cell brake, but I don't know how to define the 80% of that in iRacing. I used to use R factor, and then in every car you can define maximum braking value, but I can't find it in iRacing.
I assume it's this. With the Ricomotec, you see where you just go to 95, you'd be 80. When you set your high-end dead zone.
No, the high value, you're going to define it with your force. So my only guess is that I need to increase a higher level force that I'm not going to do with my feet to set a lower 80%, but I can't find that setting in iRacing.
I think I do think you need to do that in the joycalib file in documents in the iRacing folder. You need to change up the maximum travel of the pedal, which is given in a value. I'm going to do that in a second. If you're fine with that, I'm going to type that in this session or in the text chat, sorry, and then Josh can go on with the presentation.
Fantastic, thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Peter. So yeah, common issues with pedals. For a low cell, people say, it's too difficult to push a pedal all the way. So you can get around this by, if you have a Houston valve or other low cell pedals, you can switch out the rubbers. So if you have a smaller rubber in there, it will take more force to press it. If you have a bigger rubber, it will take less force to press it. I know with the Fanatec V3s, you can just twist the little red dial and it will change the resistance and within the load cell. If you have the CSL Elites, I believe it's a rubber you can switch out as well. Constant input. This is just, like I said, a massively common issue for everyone. Just today in my master classes, I had two people who had, they held their throttle whilst they were braking, and it just really lost them a lot of time. So yeah, you just want to set a low end dead zone for your throttle or your brake if you're dragging your brake, and that will avoid the constant input you have. If you have a potentiometer pedal, your potentiometer is like a sensor. It can get dirty and have inconsistent inputs and flickering, so there can be a lot of dust which gets in there. And I believe Peter has a link you can put in the chat, which just tells you how to clean the potentiometer. So if you could do that, that'd be great.
Yes, I can in a minute.
Perfect. And then can I hit full throttle? So you set high and dead zone for your throttle, or maybe change the spring in there. I know you can do that with the Fanatec and the Houston belt, to ensure the throttle can be compressed to full. So field of view and camera settings.
Quick question, I hope quick. On the brake in the, what is it, the V3 pedal Fanatec? So it seems like when I lift off, it's almost like a vertical. I tried to trail brake on a slope, and is there a way to set it? What's the best setting so it doesn't come off as quick? Is it just feel? You just gotta.
You mean it's like springing back too much?
Yes, yes.
Just I would maybe twist the dial so there's less resistance in the pedal.
Less, so a lower.
Also, you should be able to use your leg.
Yeah, okay.
To
That's what I was
modulate
wondering
the brake
how
pedal.
much is, okay.
You shouldn't really ever have to release a pedal, at the speed it actually releases a pedal, as you'll learn in the week 3 of the course.
Okay.
So FOV fundamentals. What is your objective? So projection. The FOV is the view you have from your seating position and how the world within iRacing, or it's the same for any other sim, is projected to your screen. So FOV affects your sense of speed and the width you see horizontally from your seating position. So there's a trade-off between sense of speed and also width you have. So obviously, if you have a higher FOV, you will have a larger width horizontally that you can see and help your vision, but it will also affect your sense of speed and affect essentially, how fast you can go, because your perspective will be all wrong. So there's a trade-off between having a high FOV and having an incorrect sense of speed. So an example, this is a 45-degree field of view, and this is a 60-degree field of view. You can see you have a smaller width that you can see with the lower FOV, and a higher width you have with this 60-degree FOV. So camera settings, these are different to the field of view. Camera settings is essentially moving your head and body location in the car, whereas FOV settings change what you can see from said camera location. They are completely different. And yeah, essentially the camera settings move. It's the same as moving your car seat forwards and backwards, but in the sim we can move the seat sideways, left and right, and also up and down. You can get, you can be 5'6" or you can be 6'4", whichever you prefer. There are field of view calculators like Dave Sam's, which can provide a good starting point for your field of view. So you just put in your monitor setup, single or triple, screen width, distance, bezel width, and you just click calculate, and it'll give all these settings, which you can just put straight into iRacing. So the driver's view settings within iRacing. So first you have field of view. If you have triples, it might be up to 125, or if you have an ultra wide. If you have a single screen, it might be down at, say, 60. But this is all, you can determine this using the calculators, or just eyeballing it, but it's recommended you use the calculators. Driver height, this is essentially what I was talking about before. You could be 6'4", or you can be 5'6". And maybe you'll be able to see more if you have a driver height quite high, but it'll also be a bit more unrealistic. And in some cars, you won't be able to see the dash if you are too high up. Shift horizon. This essentially tilts your eyes up and down. So if you have 0%, you'll be looking dead straight forward. If you have 5%, you'll be looking tilted up a bit, and this vice versa for -5%. You know, I know some people who will have a driver height quite high and then have a shift horizon, so they're tilted down, so they're like looking down on the track. But you can play around with that quite a lot. So just continued. The settings like roll chassis and pitch chassis, it's strongly recommended that you have roll chassis and pitch chassis on 0%. On 100%, sorry. Strongly recommended that you have these on 100%. Because it means like your like it says, the roll chassis blends your head rolling side to side, pitching up and down or staying level with the ground. So say you're going around an oval and there's a banked corner, it means your head will stay straight, whereas the car will like tilt with the banking, which is not what you want. And then neck motion controls a theoretical spring of a driver's neck, but smooths out bumps, just like your head would move over bumps in a car. So say you're going around Sebring, which is a really bumpy track. If you have this on 100%, on the neck motion, it's very recommended you have it on 100%. The car will be bumping up and down, whereas your camera will stay stable. And it just makes it easier to use your vision and everything with the bumps. If you have it on 0%, your camera will be directly bound to the car. So like if the car is bouncing up and down over bumps, your camera will bounce down over the bumps. And that's pretty horrible. I can speak from experience. Rotate with, I assume this is velocity, but I'm not too sure. It points your head in the direction of the car. So this is very strongly recommended you have this on 0%. It means that if you're going around a right-hand corner and you're turning right, it means your head within the car is going to look right. You might think this helps with the vision, but it is very off-putting. So it's very strongly recommended you have this on 0. Just keep the camera in a consistent position. So graphics adjustments within iRacing. So you can set this whilst you're in the garage, whilst you're sitting in the car. You can actually set it whilst you're driving around on the track. And you can adjust this whilst driving. It's just a black box, which will come up instead of your relative box. You can press F9 to get to it really quickly, or you can just scroll through. And then you have the mirror settings within here. It's recommended you only use the virtual mirror. You don't need to use the side mirrors within iRacing. The virtual mirror shows you everything and even more. It's almost like a cheat. It's probably the most unrealistic thing about iRacing. And yeah, the yaw and pitch settings only apply to the actual in-game wing mirrors. So if you have those off, you don't need to think about it. The in-game wing mirrors are very demanding for your FPS as well. And then you can set the FOV of the virtual mirror. I've never changed it. I don't know what it is on, but yeah, you can just set it up if you want to see more or less. So where to set your FOV within iRacing. So say you've used a calculator, the Dave Sam's calculator, and it's told you all this data. This is where you input it within iRacing. So you just put it up here. You can also just put this directly into iRacing, and it will come out with an FOV. The Dave Sam's one, I think, comes out a bit different by maybe 1 or 2 degrees. But you can do it within iRacing as well. So yeah, you just put in all that data and it'll come out with an FOV. When you're first setting your FOV, I tend to just have 2 buttons on my keyboard, which is up and down on the FOV. And when I'm first setting it, I'll use those whilst I'm driving just to make it comfortable. But after I've set my FOV, I haven't changed it for like a year. You want to keep it the same for every car, just so you have a consistent sense of speed. But when you're setting it, it's very helpful to have it when you, when you're first setting it whilst you're driving. So it's just a PSA. There's a camera edit button within the replay in iRacing. There's a static FOV setting here, but it's completely broken. and it will list the wrong FOV, but will override if your FOV has changed. So just completely avoid this. Don't worry about it. It's got nothing really to do with the FOV within iRacing. But yeah, don't worry about that at all. So yeah, if you've got a single screen, this is how to set up your FOV. Obviously, center your screen in your vision in real life, and then make sure you mount your monitor as close as possible to your head or your wheel. I have a single 27-inch monitor, and it's basically mounted like just behind my wheelbase, so it's very close. And then measure the viewing distance from your eyes to the screen, and then put all this in iRacing, and it'll come out with the FOV right here. This should autofill, but you can change it after. Say it comes out as 125, you can just put it to 126 if you want.
Josh, can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Is there any difference between online calculator that you mentioned and in-game iRacing?
I believe it comes out maybe 1 or 2 degrees different. I don't use the calculator online, but I know a lot of people swear by it. But I mean, if it was the same, there wouldn't be any point in having the online calculator. So I believe it comes out a bit different. Because yeah, if they both came out as 125, I don't see why anyone would use the online one.
Josh?
Yep, go ahead.
I've seen that what you can see in the virtual mirror and what you see in the left mirror has a completely different sense of depthness. Can we adjust it? Because you see in the left mirror that you have a car right behind you, and in the virtual mirror on top center, you see pretty far away.
Yeah, so this is partially why we recommend you just turn the side mirrors off. But it's because the virtual mirror field of view is different to the side mirror field of view. You have a much bigger field of view in the virtual mirror than you do in the side mirror, because the virtual mirror is just bigger.
Okay.
So yeah, I just recommend just turning them off though.
Is the virtual mirror the one that doesn't show you the helmet and roll bars and everything like that?
Yes. Yes, it's the one at the top of the screen, like the massive one. Yeah, it doesn't show you the helmet. I've never clocked, but it would if it does. But yeah. Okay, where were we? Yeah, so you can also do your camera settings. So this is obviously completely different to the FOV, but this is just for camera settings. You can do it more accurately if you want within like the replay edit. So you basically just go in iRacing, go onto the track, maybe drive around for like 10 seconds, and then go back to your replay and just find your car with the fast forward, pause it, go into the cockpit camera, press Control F12, and then you'll have this camera edit box on your replay. And then you can adjust the camera settings using the arrow keys, or just by clicking these little arrows. Or yeah, you can use your arrow keys on your keyboard, or maybe it's WASD, one of the two. And you can just change your camera like that, and it maybe a bit easier than using the driver height and everything. And then you want to make sure to press Save Car. So this way you can do a car by car camera setting. So in the LMP2, I'm basically sitting on the dashboard, so I can see out I don't get the pillar in the way. But obviously that's very different to what I'll have in the Mazda, where I sit a bit further back. And you can use this to have a car by car camera. So for VR, just briefly, obviously mount and calibrate your VR sensors. Make sure that your sensors can always see your VR headset whilst you're driving. And then make sure you're in a comfortable position, put on your VR headset. You can go into options and then go to controls, scroll to the bottom of controls, and there'll be a setting called Recenter HMD. Bind this to something, maybe even on your wheel, you can bind it. But ideally, maybe on your keyboard, and then click done. And if you just press the key bind you have for it, it will center the screen in your VR headset. So this is good because you can essentially set your driver height or your camera setting within VR. So you can like sit and slouch down in your seat really low, recenter your camera, your VR headset really low, and then when you sit up, you'll be higher in the car. So you can sort of get around that in VR. I don't use VR, but yeah, this is what people who use VR have told me they use to get around the, in some cars you sit really low by default in VR, and it's a bit annoying because you can't see. You can't use your vision as much. So yeah, that's all for the presentation. We have about 7 minutes left for questions. If anyone wants to ask any questions about the seminar, so yeah, you can unmute your mics and just go ahead.
So when you modify these camera settings are not only for the replay, it's just also for the driving, like yourself, something like that, right? So you can end up driving like in the middle of the car.
Yes. So when you set your camera in a replay, it also sets it for your in-game whilst you're driving. So you could sit in the middle if you want.
Okay.
Yeah, you might have a. Yeah, I mean, if you do it in some cars, you might have a like windscreen wiper in the way. But yeah, you can sit in the middle if you want.
Can you show us an earlier screen? It was the very beginning that showed the driver position in the seat relative to the steering wheel. Did you hear that?
Yep. This one?
Well, I think so, but in trying to unmute my microphone, I now have my name across the screen, and then what you're showing is a little thing at the top. I don't know how to get back.
Just maybe click what I'm showing.
Oh, there, I think I'm getting it now. No, it was very early. It showed the just a graphic, like a cartoon or a line drawing of a driver sitting in his in the seat with his wrist resting on. There it is. There you go.
I can't get sideways. Yeah, there. So yeah, that's the best example we found of how you should set your position of your pedals and wheel.
Yeah.
That's what's recommended.
I opened the text file to modify the what's called johncalib.jml to modify the 80% of the force, but you see just the limits. I know if that I increase that limit, will require a lower force to get the 80%, but I can see a clean way to do it. Is there a better way to do it in iRacing?
Actually, no. That should be the only way to do so, because it actually counts as a cheat. I think Josh has mentioned that. You actually are not supposed to do that, but you can.
Configuration file.
Oh, so you want to set your pedals so that you can only ever hit 80%?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, no, I wouldn't recommend doing that. Because if you spin, you need to hit 100% to stop hitting a wall.
Oh, okay. No, I can do that with the force and try to get more or less of a feeling of what an 80% is. It's what I do. But I can always hit the 100% or more with the load cell.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's essentially a cheat, I guess, if you could only ever hit 80%. But you'd have to be very confident you'll never crash, you never spin or go off the track.
Suzuki is using that, actually. Suzuki is a YouTuber.
Okay, so do we have any more questions?
Do you know a way? I know you say you don't use VR, but do you know any way of having what I see in the VR mirror on my TV, just how it is? Because it seems to be like just mirroring like one side of the VR lens.
Yeah, I know for a fact there's no way you can get around that because it only shows, I think it's either the left or right eye. It can't show both eyes because they have different perspectives. Yeah, so it'd just be offset to one side.
Oh, all right.
Just how it happens in
So,
VR.
so with that, I mean, I know you guys been doing this for a little bit now. Is that does that affect anything when it comes to feedback, to getting feedback and training and stuff like that?
Not really, no. You know, when I'm looking for people's vision, you know, usually their whole head moves towards the apex. It's much easier in VR to see people's vision. It's the only really way to see people's vision in VR really, when coaching. But
All right,
yeah,
cool.
just
Makes
showing
sense.
one eye doesn't really affect it.
Cool, thanks.
Hey, Josh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the point before about the 80% dead zone on the brake. You're saying don't set it at 80%? I thought we were talking about setting that dead zone at 80%. I didn't.
Yeah, so just to clarify, I set my pedal up. So if I press it very hard, it goes to 80%. If I want to hit 100%, I have to really properly press it, like really hard. And that only really happens when I spin or something. I don't want to hit a wall. Because in iRacing, you never want to go above around 80%, because otherwise you'll lock up or hit the ABS. And it's quite consistent per car with that 80%.
When you say you've set your pedal up, Josh, do you mean you've altered the springs in the pedal to make it harder, so you're only 80% unless you really stamp on it?
A combination of that and mostly just the kilogram force.
Right.
So I've got it on like 60 kilos. And you know, I need to go to the gym a lot more if I wanted to put it higher. But what was asked was, you know, can we just set the joyclib file within iRacing so that the pedal will only ever go within iRacing to 80%?
Okay.
No matter how hard you press it. I wouldn't recommend ever doing it.
Can I just say the only car
Thank you.
the only car I do that on is the Porsche Cup car because it's so easy to spin.
Yeah. I've driven that car a bit and I agree. But still, you know, you do need to go to 100% at some points. But yeah, I definitely wouldn't recommend using the joyclib file to only ever go to 80% because you have problems if you go off the track. So, are there any last questions before we wrap up?
I just had one about minimum force. Do you ever change around that?
I personally leave it at 0.
Okay. Yeah.
But if you have a lower end wheel which doesn't have too much force, I know people who put it on to like 5%. But if I put it on, I don't have a particularly powerful wheel. I've got a Fanatec V2. But if I put it on anything above 0, it's more of an annoyance when I'm going down the straight and it's just like oscillating left and right.
Oh yeah, gotcha. Yeah, I've got the SimiCube too, so it's probably 0 then.
Yeah, it'd probably be quite uncomfortable.
Yeah, nice one. Thanks.
Okay, guys, I think we're gonna have to wrap it up there.
Just one quick question. Any advice on clutch pedal? Because it happens a lot to me that on a quick gear change, it just goes to neutral and I miss the gear.
I gotta be honest, I just use the auto blip for the thing. I would actually recommend for everyone just to use the auto blip. In the Mazda even, it's not really a cheat because everyone uses it that I know. And yeah, just allows you to focus more on the actual techniques, like trail braking, and steering and everything without just, you know, having 99% of your focus on changing gear.
Yeah, thank you. Cheers.
So
Okay.
would you use the shifter or on the Mazda? You know, the
No, I
H-gate
just
shifter?
use paddle shifters. I don't have an H pattern.
I try to stay authentic, you know, with the H shifter and the I try to heel and toe, but I'm not very good at it.
Yeah, you know, it's just easier to learn the techniques just by using auto whip and just using a throttle and and brake. Instead of
What's
trying
the
to-
difference? Hello? What's the difference between auto blip and auto clutch? Is that the same? What?
Also, blip means that when you downshift, it blips the throttle to avoid locking up the rears. Otherwise, you'd
okay.
need to manually blip the throttle when you downshift.
Oh, okay. I got you.
So yeah, okay, we're gonna have to wrap it up there, guys. Thanks everyone for coming. I hope you've enjoyed the first week of the course, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the course. It really ramps up from here, gets a lot more intense. You'll have steering week next week, and then braking after that. I just recommend that you don't forget the vision, because the vision is the first thing to drop generally, and is also one of the most important things that we'll teach you for consistency and speed. So yeah, just keep focused on that. Thanks everyone for coming. Next week's seminar should be a Scott seminar, and then you'll be back with me for the week after that. But yeah, thanks everyone, and I'll see you around.
Okay.
Much appreciated, Josh. Thank you.
Hi, Josh.
All right. Bye, y'all.
Thanks a lot.